Good morning, Metaverse. I'm Thor with the Red Hand, and this is going to be a reading of the game manual for Sage, which is Star Atlas Golden Era. Let's begin. We have Star Atlas Golden Era, Part 1, Game Economics. First, we'll have the introduction of Sage economics. Then we will look at Score versus Sage, the R4s, Atlas, Marketplace, and DAO, deprecating Score. Then we have game economy and mechanisms in mining, managing resources, upgrading and crafting, combat, leveling, earning Atlas. And finally, we have the conclusion. Now to the introduction. The Sage economy is a massive step for both the Star Atlas ecosystem and Web3, and will be the future economic cradle for UE5 gameplay. It brings us one step closer to a fully decentralized free market economy. The development of the economic structure of Sage will be a non-linear process over years. In Sage, the economy is directly linked to player behavior and gameplay choices. Economic productivity and efficiency will be molded by mining, crafting, combat, and many other gameplay features players decide to engage in. The economics team has worked in depth with Sage game design department to ensure that every component of gameplay has been translated to work well economically. We recognize the importance of balance in design and economics and have spent many months working in unison to achieve that continuity. Our goal at Star Atlas is to make a living, breathing economy that reacts to the players and their decisions. That means that the emission and production of resources, as well as Atlas, will be dynamically determined by the players based on their choices. Some will earn a real wage in an open economy through economic gameplay like mining, crafting, and production. Others may use their capital to bypass these economic productivity loops to focus on more aggressive gameplay like combat. Further, some might use their economic ingenuity and strategy to outsmart their opponents to take over economic empires from within. There are many ways to play Sage, all of which contribute to the rich and growing economic ecosystem of Star Atlas. The freedom to choose your own adventure is key to challenging, long lasting, and fun gameplay. These adventures will coincide perfectly with the rich world the lore team has developed here at Star Atlas. Players produce in the same rich world where the events of Star Atlas graphic novel core occur. There will be tough choices with real consequences in Sage. Constant returns will no longer be assured. Players will win or lose based on their gameplay decisions, skill, and maybe a little luck. Economic gameplay skills and the desire to understand the changing dynamics will be a boon to those who dedicate themselves to analysis of the marketplace conditions. Decisions will not always be as simple as they appear. Sage is meant to challenge the player to evaluate all possible outcomes and to make many decisions that will have compounding impact over time. Part 2, comparing Score to Sage. To begin, we want to introduce veteran Star Atlas players to some of the difference between Score and Sage and how the two projects are related. In Score, players earn Atlas by deploying their ships in our faction fleet minigame. Players were required to keep their fleets properly fueled with food, fuel, ammo, and toolkits, the R4s, to reap these rewards. In Score, rewards and burn of R4 were completely static. In Sage, not only will Atlas emissions and R4 burn be dynamic, players will now have the ability to earn resources through gameplay. Sage moves us one step closer to a fully fledged and financially realized digital economy. In Sage, players will use their ships to travel around a top-down isometric universe in order to mine for resources, freight cargo, convert resources into final goods, and of course, participate in consequential combat. Behavior in Sage will directly impact the score environment in that players will now be able to subsidize their R4 costs through mining in Sage. Furthermore, players will be able to earn Atlas in Sage. See the table to the right for an outline of the primary game economic changes from Score to Sage. Let's take a look at that now. First, Atlas earnings. Score and Sage both have Atlas earnings. Expected change. While Atlas earnings will be based on effort, also in Sage economy, we do not anticipate a large disparity in average Atlas emissions per player. Next, Atlas locking. Score and Sage both have Atlas locking. There will be no changes to the Atlas locking protocol. Polis locking. They both have it, and there will be no changes to the Polis locking protocol. R4 burn. They both have R4 burn. R4 burn will be variable on the action in Sage as opposed to Score where they are constant. Free flight. In Score, you do not have free flight. In Sage, you do. Players will be able to take their fleets into a large network of systems that is the Star Atlas universe. Next, we have mining. In Score, there is no mining. In Sage, there will be mining. Players can now extract resources from planets. Next, crafting. Score does not have crafting. In Sage, we will. Players can now transform resources they have mined into more useful assets like R4 and Starbase upgrading materials. Combat. In Score, there's no combat. In Sage, there will be. Players may now participate in economically consequential combat. Ship interactions, not existent in Score, but it will be for Sage. Players can now manage the cargo, configuration, and geographic location of their fleet in the Star Atlas universe. 3D modeled ships. There are not 3D model ships in Score, but there are in Sage. Players can now see and interact with their fully functional in-engine ships. Star bases, not existent in Score, but they will be in Sage. Players can now interact with star bases, furthering the dimensionality of the Star Atlas digital world. Open resource market, not existent in Score, but it will be in Sage, and players may now produce and trade assets they have found in the game world. Next portion, comparing Score versus Sage, is the R4. As we mentioned above, the Sage economy will be entirely player driven. That goes for the R4 supply as well. Players who switch from Score to Sage will find that they produce a fair amount of R4 through Sage gameplay. They can then take this R4 and subsidize their R4 cost in Score by fueling their ships. This is, by playing Sage, you can curb the amount of R4 you have to purchase for your fleet in Score. For example, suppose a player takes a rainbow ohm out of Score and mines 100,000 hydrogen and converts it into fuel. As of this writing, that's about 20,000 fuel. A player can then fuel their pure C9 for almost an entire day. That's Atlas in your pocket. You don't have to spend fueling your C9. We discuss R4 and mining later in this document, but this is the primary way that the Sage economy will impact Score in terms of R4. This will naturally curb the amount of R4 purchased with Atlas in the Score economy. Eventually, R4 will not be sold directly to the market. It will then be up to the players to be productive and generate enough R4 to fuel ships in both Score and Sage. Just like in a real economy, the price of resources will not be static, but it will be determined by the supply and demand. Below is a graph showing the hypothetical increase in net Atlas yield across all ship classes if players are able to completely subsidize their R4 purchases with Sage R4 earnings. We emphasize that this graphic is purely illustrative. The gray bars represent current net Atlas yield for each of the ship classes. The gold bar represents a player who is now earning an R4 through Sage gameplay and is using it to offset their R4 in Score. The mechanism drives net Atlas earnings higher. Next, in Score versus Sage, we look at Atlas. Atlas rewards will be similar to Score in that players will earn Atlas as a function of their fleet class size. However, in Sage, these rewards will further depend on the player's activity in Sage Virtual World. In a later section, we describe in detail how players will earn Atlas emissions in Sage. For this section, know that Atlas emissions in Sage will be determined by a player's contribution to their faction's fight for the galaxy on the game map. If their contribution is high relative to their peers, they will get a large piece of the pie. This said, ship class and characteristics greatly dominate the contribution of Atlas rewards in Sage. For example, an extra small ship may require 250 times the amount of gameplay time to earn what a commander could in the set period of time. The transition from Score to Sage will be handled delicately by the Star Atlas economic team. But players should know that the economic benefits of playing Sage will at least match up with those in Score on average. We have developed a plan to deprecate Score, C 1.4, as we know it today and integrate it into Sage. The transition away from Score will be gradual, but is necessary to build the Sage player base and grow its economy. In the previous section, we explained why a player would benefit by pulling ships out of Score and bringing them into Sage. But there will be even more opportunities to earn in Sage through other production processes, such as producing starbase upgrading materials, ship resources, and many other gameplay materials that can be sold on the Galactic Marketplace. For every person willing to spend their time producing a good, another person is just as willing to spend the Atlas to get it without doing the work, just like the real economy. To summarize, in Sage, there will be two primary ways players can earn Atlas. One is the typical Atlas emission curve that will be effort-based but similar to Score Atlas rewards. The other is earnings a player will get by participating in the economy. At least right now, the plan is that the Atlas emission curve will eventually run out. It currently acts as a subsidy for early adopters to kickstart the economy and provide a liquid currency. Eventually, the Star Atlas economy will run purely on free market activity like trading, completing bounties, piracy, and much more. Next in the Score versus Sage is the Marketplace and DAO. Neither the Marketplace nor the DAO will see any direct changes come Sage release. There will, however, be some indirect impacts. For example, the Marketplace will see an influx of new resources like Starbase upgrading materials and ship bonus items like shields and boosters. One final impact on the marketplace will be the Sage player's ability to sell their refined R4 to the marketplace. The most likely buyers of this R4 will be those still in Score, or those who do not want to mine and refine their own R4. The DAO functionality will not change. However, some players will have earned more in Sage than they did in Score, increasing contributions to Atlas and Polis locking. While it is not planned for Sage v0, the DAO will eventually start to contribute more broadly to policy in Sage and the Star Atlas ecosystem. With the transition to a fully functioning and self-contained economy, R4 will be a dynamic asset produced and sold by players and not sold at a static price by the DAO. An increase in secondary market activity due to Sage production and trade will make up for some, if not all, of the loss in the DAO revenue from halting primary R4 sales. Since we introduced the variable 6% marketplace fee on September 29, 2022, the DAO has received 1/3 of all marketplace transaction fees. Next, in comparing Score versus Sage, is deprecating Score. Since inception, Score has provided a massive utility to early adopters in Star Atlas ecosystem. It has served its purpose as a great way for Star Atlas natives to maintain the utility of their assets while our team develops out an incredible game. However, as the Sage and UE5 seasonal experience new closed loop economic incentives, Score primary utility is replaced with more robust gameplay. As such, score will be sunset. Already, we see thousands of players entering the UE5 showroom and using their ships with great effect. With powerful gameplay such as this, most players won't need or want to keep their ships in score any longer. Furthermore, as we fill out our fully player-driven economy in score, the, the score economy will eventually become redundant. Some of these economic changes are outlined below. One, the production and supply of R4 in the Star Atlas economy will depend entirely on the player population. As such, the DAO will cease to sell R4 at a fixed price with infinite supply on the galactic marketplace. Number two, as players begin earning the majority of their Atlas emissions in stage, they will have very little incentive or reason to hold ships in score. In addition, players will begin earning a productivity wage based on their economic behavior within Sage. With these two forms of earning dominating the Star Atlas ecosystem, score emissions will be deprecated along with score R4 burn. Eventually, all ships will belong to Sage or UE5 ecosystems. The economic team at Star Atlas will handle scores deprecation with delicacy, appreciating any sentimental value early adopters may hold to that platform. Our philosophy follows. Players will likely not notice the deprecation of score, as by the time it occurs, the vast majority of players will be using their fleets in Stage and UE5 game environments. The economy of score will be fully enveloped in the new economy that comes with Sage. We appreciate the significance of the eventual sunset of score and will provide detailed information on the process as we go. The third section is game economy mechanisms. The Star Atlas Sage economy is organic and expected to grow indefinitely with the Star Atlas population. Not only will the economy grow as the Star Atlas product grows and releases new content, but it will also grow with the players as they discover new ways to behave and optimize economic processes, just as we see done in the real world. The Sage economy is designed with a free market in mind, without reliance on intervention by a centralized authority. Much like the real world economy is a living, breathing thing, so too do we expect Sage and future economy of Star Atlas to be. The following sections outline the many major aspects of Star Atlas in-game economy. This manual is expected to grow over time with the Star Atlas economy, and in each section, the reader will pick up tips and tricks about how they might expect each economic process to function. The reader should pick up at least a few hints to help guide their gameplay towards an optimum. The Star Atlas in-game economy is designed with neoclassical economic theory in mind. Thus, players must decide what they believe to be the optimal economic efficiency. However, just as in real life, best laid plans seldom hold up to the test of application. The most economically bountiful areas in Star Atlas universe will also be the most dangerous. One cannot behave entirely individualistically. One has to consider their competition. As John Nash famously proved, sometimes the optimal behavior changes by adding adversaries into the system. The more competition in Star Atlas, the higher the reward and in turn, stakes. We hope the reader will find this manual helpful in their travels throughout the Star Atlas universe and insightful as an exercise in economic thought. Section 3, Game Economy Mechanisms. Mining. Resource emissions in Sage are handled quite simply. Much like in the real world, resources are seldom limited by some artificial cap in quantity. Rather, they are limited by pure scarcity. Scarcity should not be confused with the quantity available. As we have seen in the past with MMORPGs, quantity-limited spaces for resources lead to very unfun gameplay and can be detrimental to the growth of the game. At Star Atlas, we take a so-called size of the straw approach, where a resource is limited only in the speed at which it can be extracted from a location, and by whether or not it is spawned. Scarcity determines this speed. Many variables impact the scarcity of a resource. When a player commits to mining at a specific planet, the resources emit from the planet to the player are based on several factors. Below is a visualization of planet to ship class resource emission as they will be in Sage. We discuss each variable and its impact on emissions in the following sections. Resource emissions by ship size and resource hardness. Briefly, this shows a graph of resource emissions per ship and ship class size. That's extra, extra small all the way up to Mander. And then there are 8 hardness levels depicted by different colors and the hardness resource emissions per hardness level. Remember, these graphics are illustrative and are more for the concept from one ship class to the next in the exponential growth of the ability to pull more resources through the straw. Continue with game economy mechanics. There's resource richness. First, the difficulty of finding a resource will impact the acquisition rate. Game economy mechanics continue with resource richness. First, the difficulty of finding a resource will impact the acquisition rate. It could be that the case a resource is near impossible to find, but once you find it, supply is abundant. The difficulty in acquiring this resource is due entirely to the hunt. Remember that once you find that beautiful resource, morally questionable individuals may be biding their time to gain those resources the easy way. The visualization above is derived from a specific value of richness. The bars in the figure will increase in height for a more rich area. In Sage, many star systems are interconnected by galactic warp lanes known as star paths. Some systems are more well connected than others. On the other hand, some systems are very difficult to get to, i.e., they have fewer warp lane connections and are farther from civilization. Systems that are more difficult to get to have higher values of richness. There are 5 richness levels in Sage, where higher levels of richness are associated with rare resources and are more challenging to get to. More rare resources will be dispersed more heavily in rich parts of the galaxy. Furthermore, the yield of those resources is higher in these rich areas. Thus, players are motivated to travel into deep space to extract exceptionally rare resources. However, these locations are also bustling with firepower and combat activity. Stay safe and prepare well if you plan to venture into one of these rich sectors of space. Resource hardness. The second component contributing to the resource scarcity is the difficulty of extracting that resource. Within the Star Atlas economy team, we call this the size of the straw. You might have a giant bucket of water, but if you only have a tiny coffee stirrer to extract it with, your thirst may not be quenched as soon as you would like. And while you are huffing and puffing on that straw, keep in mind the player standing idly by waiting to strike. Resources in Sage have an attribute called hardness. As you might have guessed, the harder the resource, the more difficult it is to extract, and your yield of that resource will be worse. Consider how much diamond one might find in a kilogram of dirt versus that of iron. You can also think of this as the difficulty of mining the resource. Some resources are simply more challenging to extract, so you get a lower yield per unit of time spent mining. Ship size. Some ships will have an easier time extracting resources than others. Once the resource has been identified, you'd be well suited to use your most powerful mining rig to extract resources. Note that larger ships are exponentially more efficient at extracting resources. For example, a Finbuel airbike might yield 6 units of iron every second, while a Rainbow Arc pulls in about 200. Those numbers are accurate as of the time of the writing. See the following graph for a visualization of resources emissions in Sage by ship class size, as seen on the graph earlier. A ship's class size will be the single largest contributing factor when determining the emissions of a resource from a planet. Richness only impacts resource emissions linearly, as does hardness. However, ship class size impacts resource emissions exponentially. A commander designed for resource extraction could outperform an extra small ship by a factor of nearly 300 at times. Bigger ship, bigger resource extraction. As has been announced previously, certain ships will have modifiers in the form of modules and components that will give them significant advantage over ships in their class. However, these bonuses are on a percentage basis. No ship of a smaller class will ever outperform a ship of a larger class, no matter the component bonuses. Game economy mechanics continued. Resource usefulness. The fourth and final contributor to resource scarcity in Sage is the resource usefulness, or utility, in the overarching economy. To better grasp this concept of usefulness, consider two equally abundant resources, according to the two sections above. However, one of these resources is used during battle and travel, while the other is only used for travel. If those resources are used in the same proportion, then the first one will be twice as scarce because it is twice as useful. This idea of usefulness will become increasingly important as the Sage economy grows. Furthermore, this mechanic makes economic arbitrage and buy low, sell high feasible. Players can identify these resources that may become more or less useful and use their economic savvy to buy or sell off resources to turn a profit. For example, suppose a player has a feeling two factions are about to go to war. They might be wise to buy up ammunition, knowing that it will be in high demand next week in the wake of the carnage. Speaking of demand, resource usage can be easily compared to demand. If usefulness is high, so too will demand for the asset. This logic will help players utilize the gameplay mechanics for personal economic gain. In the beginning, Sage will likely be relatively equal distribution of usefulness across all assets in the economy. But as players join the economy and more resources and assets become available to create in time, distribution will quickly fall apart. See the diagram below for an example of resource scarcity and usefulness in an economy. You see that resource A and B both come into the economy at the same rate, 2 per period. However, resource B is not as useful as resource A. Only one of B is used in the economy, while two are used of A. This causes a surplus of resource B to be built up over time. If we were to continue like this forever, the surplus of B would indefinitely grow. The economic team can mitigate such asymmetries through powerful levers. For example, we could either decrease B's spawn rate or increase A's use case. Managing resources. One very important aspect of Star Atlas economy is R4 and R4 burn. Each ship has a different quantity of R4 that it must burn through to complete its daily tasks. Whether a player travels, mines, or fights, they will be using R4. Fuel is used for travel and combat. Food is used during mining and combat. Toolkits and ammo are used only for combat. Notice that while the rewards for combat are great, the cost of resources is also high. Players extract hydrogen, organics, iron, and copper and refine them into the space stations into fuel, food, toolkits, and ammo, respectively. This means that players will spend some portion of their time mining to finance their non-mining activities. Of course, a player could always purchase the R4 on the open market if they don't want to commit time to mine up the R20s and refine it to R4. Each raw resource has a different resource conversion rate. For example, it might take 1 organic to make 1 food, while it takes 5 hydrogen to make 1 fuel. Just as with mining, large ships will use exponentially more R4 when operating. But don't worry, your margins are still bigger. In order to keep the economy balanced so that what goes in comes out, we have clearly balanced the economy on the ship level. This means that no matter how many players or ships there are in Sage, the economy will always require a proportional amount of R4 to be burned to keep the economy churning. The Sage economy will have to allocate its time efficiently, to best suit the faction's need. If too many players are extracting R20, the defense of the starbase might be low, leaving an opportunity for an enemy faction to strike. This would also likely cause prices of R4 to drop on the open market. An influx of supply usually leads to a decrease in prices. Similarly, if players focus too much on combat and not enough on resource extraction, they will likely see very high R4 prices on the open market, potentially grinding the economy to a halt. Players and factions will have to make difficult decisions about time allocation to best support the macroeconomic while maintaining appropriate levels of combat readiness. Below, we present a visualization of the rate of burn of R4 across ship class size for various fuel burning actions. Fuel burning actions are currently set to impulse travel, warp travel, planetary exit, and combat. One can compare the colored lines in the fuel burn to the pre-second emission base rate of fuel for each ship class. Please note that all economic levers are subject to change after place testing of the DevNet launch. And here's the fuel costs across various fuel burning actions. The red line is combat encounter. Blue line is the Warp 1 Atlas unit. The yellow line is the Impulse 1 Atlas unit. The green line is exit planetary atmosphere. And then the white is baseline fuel emissions. There will be several R4 consuming actions at the launch of Sage. The following list summarizes the type of actions and their associated costs. Your warp movement, resource burnt is fuel, cost is high. The impulse movement, resource is fuel, cost is medium. Exit planetary atmosphere, resource is fuel, the cost is low. Combat encounter, resource burnt is fuel, food, combat, and ammo, cost is high. Mining, resource burnt is food, cost is low. Crafting, non-R4, upgrading is non-R4, and idling, there is no resource burnt. Upgrading and crafting. In the first iteration of Sage, upgrading and crafting are relatively straightforward. Players will gather resources from the galaxy and use them to convert R4 as fuel for their ship, or craft starbase upgrading materials. These materials are then used to, you guessed it, upgrade the star bases. Some other consumables and assets will be slowly introduced to the economy after release. Crafting is simple enough. Each starbase upgrading material will need two different inputs from the R20 of differing quantities. Once a player has these materials, they will begin the crafting process. After some time, the crafting asset will be available for pickup. As one can imagine, more rare upgrading materials, radiation absorbers for example, will require more rare inputs. Upgrading a starbase, on the other hand, is quite costly because starbase upgrading is a group effort. The upgrade material quantities are intrinsically linked to the number of players in the economy. Everyone must pull their weight within the faction to successfully defend their region of space. The logic is simple. On average, each player is expected to contribute some effort towards upgrading the starbase. If all players were to contribute equally, this would be a relatively small time commitment for each player. However, some players will be more interested in attacking the other faction starbase or defending their own. Thus, the responsibility to upgrade and maintain starbases will fall into the hands of a select few, while others focus on mining and combat. The key is that each player is properly compensated for their economic effort. Combat. From survey data, we know that combat is one of Sage's most highly anticipated game mechanics. While the economic team cares a lot about the cost and benefit of combat, we will leave the explanation of combat in detail to the experts over at the game design team. The Star Atlas economics and game design team believe that combat should be appropriately rewarded. To that end, combat reward two extremely valuable stats to players, XP and LP. The former, as you might guess, allows players to The former, as you might have guessed, allows players to level the pilot's license up in order to utilize larger ships. The latter, LP, not only allows players to access exclusive LP store items during each epoch, but it also the measurement by which Atlas emissions are distributed in the Sage ecosystem. The next two sections discuss leveling and Atlas earning in depth. Aside from XP and LP, players will receive loot after defeating enemies in Sage. This loot will be related to the cargo of the destroyed opponent and the number of assets in the encounter. However, assets in the Star Atlas universe are not invincible. Once destroyed in a dogfight or large battle, many assets are gone forever. One of the keys of creating a sustainable economy is the asset depreciation and destruction. Game economies move so much faster than the real world, so assets must be used up with the same rapidity. While some items will be salvageable from a combat encounter, others will not. In this way, combat has serious consequences. However, as discussed in the previous section, it also has serious rewards. To summarize, players will be rewarded with loot drops, XP, and LP for participating in a combat encounter. We've discussed the cost of combat briefly in the previous section, but to reiterate, combat costs are fuel, food, and ammo during an encounter. After an encounter, a player may heal with toolkits, making combat the most costly type of economic activity in Sage. A player must go out and produce R4 to save up enough for a battle. Alternatively, they can buy the necessary R4 on the open market to avoid this production loop. The key is that production and combat go hand in hand in the Sage economy. Leveling. In Sage, specific actions reward players with XP. These actions include repairing and upgrading starbases, getting into combat encounters with opposing factions, destroying starbases, felling planets, and many others. More dangerous feats will naturally reward the players with more XP, and XP acquisition will scale with the size of the player's fleet. At the inception of Sage, players will all start with the same abilities and rank. It is up to the player to accomplish epic tasks and earn XP quickly to level up and man larger ships. Players with large fleets will start to level up faster, while their small ship owning counterparts will stay at a slower leveling speed. At launch, there will be 100 levels for a player to ascend. The higher the levels will be extremely difficult to achieve and are reserved for the most committed players. In this way, the Sage economy will start slowly upon release. Players will slowly build their fleet up as they level. As time goes on, players will start to form larger and larger fleets, which will have huge productive and destructive power. We anticipate that these early days will be when most economically savvy players will gain an advantage, leading to an even more devastating late game movements. Earning Atlas. Atlas in Sage is earned and distributed through the Loyalty Points mechanism, LP. Like XP, players will be rewarded with LP for accomplishing faction-specific feats such as defending, repairing, and upgrading a friendly faction starbase and attacking an enemy starbase. As Sage develops, we plan to expand the ways players can earn LP missions. LP acquisition will be exponentially faster for larger ships, just as Atlas emissions in Score grow exponentially with ship size. The incentive should be 1-to-1 when Sage first releases, conditional on ship size. However, LP earnings are effort-based. This means that someone willing to put in more effort will get rewarded at a higher rate in Sage than they would have in Score. This is a powerful but important feature. At the end of an epoch, Atlas emissions will be divided among players in Sage based on the LP shared for the total LP earned by their faction. Below is an explanatory formula that shows how LP shares determines Atlas emissions in Sage, where LP sub I is simply the amount of LP that an individual player earned during the epoch. The sigma expression is simply the sum of all the LP earned by the player's faction during the epoch. And finally, Atlas subfaction is simply the total Atlas allocation to the faction for that Sage epoch. In addition to the missions and earning of Atlas, Sage will have several opportunities for players to use their Atlas outside of the Galactic Marketplace. One such opportunity is what we are currently naming the Loyalty Point Store. As players acquire more and more LP during an epoch, they will gain access to an exclusive LP locked marketplace that allows them to purchase cosmetic items to deck their Star Atlas assets out in. These could be badges, skins, pets, and much more. We have further developing in-game Atlas syncs that allow players to use their earned Atlas to improve gameplay experiences. These will never give a player a power advantage per ship, but they might save the player a few minutes at a time. Conclusion. We hope you have enjoyed reading about the Sage economy in the context of Score and the new exciting game loops that will drive the Star Atlas economy. Our powerful guilds will no doubt read this document through multiple times. In Star Atlas, there is power in numbers. Coordination and efficiency, just like in the real world, lend a powerful advantage to those willing to combine their efforts for the greater good of the economy. Our players, whether they are vagabonds or massive corporations, should read through this manual in order to best prepare for the full launch of Sage. In addition to reading this document, participate in the Sage V0 DevNet launch and other testing phases to better understand the Sage economy and help our team. The economic team understands the importance of balance in a virtual setting. Sage is an important step to ensure that the assets within the Star Atlas ecosystem hold their value and introduce new players from around the world into the gaming of Web3 space. Star Atlas is creating one of the most economically realistic Web3 gaming experiences available, and we're very excited to have you all along for the flight. Lastly, the legal disclaimer, blah, 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 read it yourself. Hopefully you found that reading useful. Don't worry about liking or subscribing, but if you know somebody that would find this useful, then please share it with them. Use this to listen to it multiple times and get your game plan strategies with your guilds and or by yourself. Feel free to contact me. I love talking about this stuff. I know this is not an editorial, but I'm really excited after that reading and the depth that the economic team has gone to. So a big thank you and a shout out to them for putting the amount of time and effort into creating a real living, breathing economy for Star Atlas.